In yet another dramatic U-turn, U.S. President Donald Trump now says he looks forward to speaking with what he calls his very good friend, Prime Minister Modi, in coming weeks. Trump said he feels certain that Washington and New Delhi will reach a successful conclusion on trade. In a Truth Social post, the U.S. President wrote, and let's pull up those graphics, I'm pleased to announce that India and the United States of America are continuing negotiations to address the trade barriers between our two nations. He also went on to say, I look forward to speaking with my very good friend Prime Minister Modi in the upcoming weeks. I feel certain that there will be no difficulty in coming to a successful conclusion for both of our great countries. Now remember, Trump's rhetoric towards India has toned down after New Delhi's participation in the SCO summit, where pictures of Prime Minister Modi and Putin as well as Xi Jinping underscored their bonhomie, and those images went viral too. Now, right after Trump's message on Truth Social, India and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has replied with a strong affirmation of India-U.S. ties. Prime Minister Modi said on X, India and the U.S. are close friends and natural partners. I'm confident our trade negotiations will unlock the limitless potential of our partnership. Prime Minister Modi added that teams on both sides are working to conclude the talks at the earliest and that he is looking forward to speaking with President Trump soon. He also said that together, the two nations, India and US, will work to secure a brighter, more prosperous future for their people. So let's unpack what this latest round of messaging exchanges on social media between US President Donald Trump as well as Prime Minister Modi mean, especially given the fact that there is a 50% tariff already on India and there are certain red lines that India is unlikely to back down on. Dr. Srinath, policy researcher and corporate advisor, joining us this morning along with Lloyd, Mathias, angel investor. Good morning, gentlemen. Pleasure having you back on News 9 after a while, I might add. I want to understand, Srinath, from you first, that there are certain red lines, and these red lines on agriculture, dairy, fisheries, these sectors are unlikely for India to back down on. And despite the GST 2.0, India, to safeguard its labor-intensive MSME sector, continues to be a priority. Add to that, of course, India has gone ahead multiple times on multiple fora and said that we will continue to buy Russian oil as well. So if these red lines continue to be intact, what new way forward can we expect in the new round of trade talks?
Morning, Kartik. I think red line, also sounds more Kremlinish to an extent. I think we should say non-negotiables at best.
All right.
Or probably the sovereign line, that this is a line that India would never cross. 1/6 of the world's population and a huge younger population at that, and an agrarian economy at that. I think India cannot afford to kind of blink. So in this standoff, so to speak, political standoff, so to speak, I think Prime Minister Modi's very diplomatic and yet very firm, resolute stance of not backing down, I think one is laudable. And he has also openly said so in so many words, and we are also seeing the opposition kind of rallying together, saying in the interest of sovereign, we will not back down, even though there will be short-term pain. I think GST 2, for all the rhetoric, especially the political one, saying that it has been thought through for a very long time, doesn't look so. It definitely is a reaction to the Trump tariff. But I wish that we use Trump tariff as almost the 1990s movement when India had embargo from the US after the nuclear test. And we had to do a lot of political and policy redo all over again. I think, can we use this as almost a crisis moment? My worry is we are probably missing this. So coming back, I think India will not blink first, is my feeling, considering that there's too much at stake politically. And let's not forget two aspects. Despite being national leaders, they're also politicians and have to set the tone for the next election, and which is what Trump is doing. But there is far more larger at stake for Prime Minister Modi, because the reforms that he has set in motion cannot be undone by President Trump. And that's where we are.
All right. So India unlikely to blink first. Lloyd, Mathias, I want to bring you into this discussion, and also at a time when there seems to be yet again some sort of mixed signals emerging from the US, because reportedly, and in fact, a story in the Financial Times has reported that President Donald Trump is weighing massive new tariffs of up to 100% on India and China in a bid to pressurize Russia. Now, this report also goes on to say that US and European officials in Washington will impose these new sweeping duties as much as 100%, and that again in a bid to add pressure on Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, this is months after Trump gave Moscow a deadline to agree on a deal to end the war in Ukraine. But that war is anywhere near its end date from where we see it right now. So again, this mixed signaling from Donald Trump. At one level, you are continuing with the 50% tariff. You want to also potentially show this image that you are willing to take the hard line even further and impose tariffs up to 100% on India, and then immediately going on social media and saying, I'm keen to speak to my very good friend Modi and we will figure out a way forward.
Good morning, Kartik. Great to be back. I think what you've summarized is really a little bit of, I would say beyond mixed signaling. I think it's a bit of scrambled signaling. But, sadly, otherwise, it's become pretty mainstream over the last few months in terms of what's emerging from the US leadership. I would say two things. One, I think clearly, what's transpired in the last fortnight. I think India's attendance at the SCO summit, the photo ops between Modi, President Putin, and President Xi, I think sent a clear signal to the US that India is holding firm. Very clearly, India will not buckle down under pressure, either from posts on Truth Social or obviously the tariffs which have come into play. And it is going to mean short-term harm. It is going to hurt for the short term. I think clearly India laid down the red lines clearly. To an extent, I would say, not to an extent, to a large extent, I think India's population rallied behind the ruling dispensation. I think the opposition too, in a sense, held on to that. So I think it sent a very clear message. I think what we're seeing in the last few days is clearly, a newly popular term, an off-ramp. I think what we're seeing is a softening of the US stance. We've realized that Russia hasn't really paid heed to, let's say, the Alaska summit. And clearly the Russia-Ukraine war is kind of not really de-escalating in any form. I think China has further continued on its own path. I mean, the special celebrations with King Dong-Hyun and Putin, I think clearly sent a hard message. So I think what the US has recognized is that clearly the importance of India as a long-term strategic partner, the short-term rhetoric notwithstanding. I also understand that pressure is building up to some extent within the US, even among Republicans, about the fact that the whole India relationship soaring is not going down very well. So I think that part remains. The second part, I think, pragmatism within the US establishment is recognizing that India has a lot to offer outside of the trade imbalance. Yeah. And the fact that we are a very large weapons importer and we've been pushed further into the Russia quadrant. So India in the last 2 decades have opened up to the US. Two is as purchasers of commercial aircraft. I think a lot of person-to-person ties. I think those aspects are slowly coming home to roost. And I think that's really making President Trump get into an off-ramp, or what I would really call almost about to make a U-turn. I would sense the tidings are good. I think within the next month or two, I think things will change quite dramatically. And I really believe we have optimism to look beyond those 50% tariffs, which sooner than later will get to more rational levels.
Yeah, so more rational levels, of course, expected on the tariff front. But let's look at what is it that US expects from India. Let's look at those points one by one, and maybe I'll take reactions from both of you alternately on this. The first thing that US seems to want from India are lower tariffs on agriculture products. This includes corn, soybean, almonds, apples, ethanol, etc. Srinath, can India afford to lower agri-tariffs? Is this something that you think in the next round or any further subsequent rounds of negotiations, India will look at lowering tariffs on agri-products? If you could unmute yourselves, please, Srinath.
Sorry, it's far more structural solution. It's not as easy as just reducing the tariff.
Okay.
We have a problem of farm-to-plate inefficiency. We are far more inefficient as an agri sector, and our productivity numbers are far, far lower. We are not fully mechanized. We don't have corporate holdings. We don't have large holdings. So one part of the answer is it is a political question. You have a large mass of people who are also voters. So it becomes a political equation that are you giving in? Are you sacrificing the nation for a global deal? So it's a non-starter there. And two, even economically, I don't think we are ready today to open up the doors for corporatization, so to speak, of the agri sector. So
Yeah.
I think we are looking not less than at least the next decade before we can open up anything in the farm sector.
Right. So simple answer, short-term answer is no, India
No.
is unlikely to lower tariffs on agri. Second point to you, Lloyd, US wants India to buy more military equipment. We know that the GE engines, 104s for the Tejas are already under a stage of India procuring. But beyond that, US wants India to buy more military equipment. Now, India, like we've discussed already, is also in talks with Russia, and that becomes a threat for the US. But can India afford to up its defense purchases, equipment purchases from the US to balance out what Trump feels is an imbalance in the trade equation?
I think that's the area that India will have to soften a little bit.
Okay.
As Srinath said, clearly there's a hard line in terms of what India can and cannot do in agriculture, both in terms of India's preparedness and also the kind of political signaling that the ruling dispensation would like to send to Indian farmers. And I think the Prime Minister has repeatedly asserted that Indian farmer interests, Indian fishermen interests are not going to be compromised. So clearly I do believe that part is not going to be. But when it comes to defense purchasing, I think India, being the largest defense importer in the world, can afford to turn around a little bit and move a few things to the US. But specifically outside of defense, I would say two things also work in India's favor. I think one is the fact that as a commercial aircraft buyer,
Yeah.
with two airlines playing and, Air India already having, I think, top of the order book when it comes to Boeing planes over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
I think those are key levers that India will play. So I think India will have to soften a little bit as far as defense purchases goes. Will possibly look at other avenues where some degree of import from the US can permit. Will also soften some of the tariffs on internal US goods, like they did in the last round with Harley-Davidson lights and the
Right.
cosmetic changes. I think those are areas where things will soften a bit.
All right. I'll combine the next two questions to you, Srinath. US also wants India to stop buying Russian oil. India has said India will not stop buying Russian oil. At the same time, at least from what the political messaging and diplomatic messaging around Trump's chides on India, Putin, Xi Jinping coming together seem to suggest that US wants India to maintain trading distance from the BRICS bloc. So are either of these in the likelihood of India agreeing on? Russian oil, India may at best reduce purchasing, and there are reports which are suggesting that India has already reduced its shipments of Russian oil coming into the country. But a trading distance from the BRICS bloc, some sort of a disassociation with BRICS, is that too far-fetched for the US to expect?
So I think it is also too far-fetched to expect India to cut off ties with Russia. I mean, that's a starter. I mean, BRICS comes a far
Sure.
later one because
Sure.
BRICS is in reality only about 15 years old. But the narrative is India as a non-aligned nation. It works with all the partisans around the world. If you look at the entire current crisis is happening, Russia, Ukraine, India is friendly with both. Iran, Israel, India is friendly with both. So the reality is India is not going to trade off one party to another or one friendship, so to speak. So I think it is also very childish, but not new for the US to expect others to behave like kids, saying that if you are going to talk to another kid, I'm not going to speak to you.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't work with India anymore, not the 21st century India now. I think it will be a non-negotiable, and I also have a slightly divergent view from Lloyd's perspective on the defense and purchases. Yes, India would probably offer soft of buying more weapons from the US. I think, but it cannot come at the cost of buying outdated fifth-generation equipments. I think the last time the purchases did not go through because the US was not offering the latest generation. And I think India would expect a lot of these MRO facilities, especially for airlines, to be set up in India. The downtime can be far expensive strategically if your planes don't function. Planes and airlines make money only when they're flying. So which means the availability of spare parts and upgrades.
But flip side to that, Srinath, also is, can India afford and does India need the F-35s, for example? They're going to cost us a bomb. They're going to cost India a leg and an arm. And India may or may not really have a use case for the F-35s.
So, Kartik, I mean, this is where basic economics comes into play, right? I mean, if you look at the entire aviation sector and all defense sector, the manufacturer is also the part financial. The entire sales is pegged on the financing package. So if you look at the US, almost every single deals that they have done in the last so many decades are all with financing package. And it also kind of holds them because the spares and servicing for the next subsequent 20 or 30 years, that one full generation, is dependent on that country. So that there is also a strategic challenge for national security aspect. Would you buy equipments, especially in the latest fourth industrial revolution IoT equipments, where somebody actually holds the source code master key and can switch it off midair? I mean, it looks very scary and almost like a spy movie, but that's the reality with current technology. You buy all the planes and the source code is with a country that suddenly doesn't like you anymore. What's going to happen to your spare parts and what's going to happen to your machinery? They might be non-functional.
Absolutely. Lloyd, final question to you. Trump also seems to want India to, one way or another, acknowledge his role in the ceasefire during Operation Sindoor. Now, India has very clearly said the call came from Pakistan, and Trump had little role, in fact, no role to play in the ceasefire or the cessation of firing. Trump has been repeatedly saying that he was the one who made the phone calls and he got India and Pakistan to agree to a ceasefire. Diplomatically, how should India tread this line of Trump wanting acknowledgement?
India has long held the point that they don't need an external intervention solving a border dispute with Pakistan. I think India will hold that line. Again, a strong message for the internal political electorate. But I think knowing Trump's craving, I think while obviously this will not change, this question will not change, I think India will try to move out of that issue and focus discussions on defense imports, on trade, and find various other points of common ground. I really believe that's another area that India is not going to acquire. And I presume that Trump has overplayed his hand on that front. I don't see things changing quite dramatically there.
All right, things not changing dramatically on the Operation Sindoor acknowledgement front. Srinath, Sridharan, Lloyd, Mathias, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us here on News 9 with those very vital inputs.